Beneath the endless sound of the ocean, where waves fold and unfold like the breathing of the earth itself, there lives an idea older than memory and yet forever young in imagination. It is a story of a city, or perhaps a civilization, that was said to have been greater than any other, radiant in its wisdom, vast in its power, and finally swallowed whole by the sea. We call it Atlantis. The name alone sends a soft vibration through history, echoing not only in dusty texts but in dreams, stories, and even the quiet wonder of those who look across the horizon and imagine land beyond sight. To begin this whispered history is to open a door not into certainty, but into a realm where fact and myth move like light and shadow across the same surface. When we speak of Atlantis, we are not merely speaking of place. We are speaking of a longing. Human beings, from the earliest tribes who gathered around firelight to the philosophers who debated beneath stone colonnades, have always carried within them a sense that something has been lost. A paradise misplaced. A golden age forgotten. Atlantis is that dream-given shape, the shimmering outline of a memory too fragile to hold but too beautiful to release. It is a story that slips between the fingers of time, as if it were written on water. This beginning invites us to picture Atlantis not as ruins scattered across the ocean floor, but as a living idea, a vision whispered from one generation to the next. Imagine standing by the sea at twilight, when the sky folds into darkness and the first stars appear. The waves whisper against the shore, and in that sound lies the echo of Atlantis. Not a city you can point to on a map, but a question that has followed humanity across centuries. What lies beyond the known world, and what might have been lost to the deep? Our guide into this story is Plato, the philosopher of ancient Greece. Yet before we turn to his words, it is important to rest in the silence of what Atlantis means beyond scholarship. To many, it is not a lesson in history, but a meditation on possibility. To others, it is a warning, a tale of arrogance punished by nature. And for countless dreamers, it is a place of beauty beyond imagining, where temples gleamed in sunlight and ships sailed from harbors lined with marble. The tension between history and myth is where the enchantment lives. This is a gentle current we will follow throughout our journey, drifting between what can be known and what must be dreamed. As you listen, allow yourself to feel the duality of Atlantis. On one side lies the realm of evidence, the writings of ancient philosophers, the discoveries of archaeologists, the logic of geology and oceanography. On the other side lies the realm of imagination, the visions of poets, mystics, and explorers who see in Atlantis a mirror of human hope and human fear. We will walk softly between these worlds, never forcing a choice, but rather savoring the mystery that has kept Atlantis alive for millennia. To begin a history in whispers is to slow the pace, to allow each idea to rise like a tide before receding into the next. So let us linger here, at the threshold of the tale. Consider the countless civilizations that have risen and fallen: Sumer, Egypt, Greece, Rome, each leaving behind stone, pottery, inscriptions, fragments of what once was. But Atlantis leaves behind nothing solid, only a name, only a description passed down through words. And yet, this absence has not weakened the story. On the contrary, it has strengthened it. For what is not fixed in stone becomes free to live in imagination, to shift and adapt to every new era. Atlantis is not only the memory of the past, but also the reflection of our present desires and fears. There is a paradox here. The more we search for Atlantis, the further it seems to drift, as if the act of trying to pin it down causes it to slip away. And yet, when we stop searching and simply listen to the whisper of the waves, we feel it close. Perhaps this is why Atlantis is so perfect a story for nights and dreams, because it resists certainty. It refuses to be contained by evidence or denied by skepticism. It hovers between belief and doubt, inviting us not to solve it but to surrender to it. The purpose of this journey, then, is not to prove or disprove Atlantis. It is not to end with a declaration of what is real and what is myth. It is instead to walk slowly through its echoes, to see how it has lived in the minds of those before us, and how it continues to shape the imagination of today. Like a song half remembered, Atlantis is carried forward by the rhythm of human curiosity. And so, as we move deeper into this whispered history, we will meet the voices that first spoke its name, the myths that surrounded it, and the worlds that claimed it for their own. Before us lies a path across time, beginning in the words of a philosopher over 2,000 years ago. Plato, whose dialogues have shaped Western thought, first breathed life into the idea of Atlantis. He spoke of it not as fantasy, but as a history passed down from older sources. Whether he believed in it or merely used it as allegory is a question that will follow us. But what matters now is that he gave Atlantis form, and in doing so, ensured that humanity would never stop listening for it beneath the waves. And so we stand at the edge, gazing out into the sea of time, knowing that the waters before us hide both truths and illusions. The story of Atlantis begins here, but it does not end. It rises and falls like the tides, sometimes nearly forgotten, sometimes burning brightly in the imagination of explorers and dreamers. To walk with Atlantis is to walk with the eternal balance between light and shadow, between what we know and what we long to believe. With this whisper of beginnings, we now turn to Plato himself, the philosopher who set pen to parchment and gave the world its first written memory of Atlantis. His voice is the first ripple on the water, the first star in the darkening sky. And as we follow it, we step into a story that will carry us across centuries, through myth and history, science and speculation, all the way to the present moment, where Atlantis still waits, just beyond the horizon, just beneath the waves. When we step from the shimmering shoreline of dreams into the written record of history, we find that Atlantis does not greet us in fragments of stone or buried cities. It greets us instead through the quiet voice of one man, Plato, the philosopher of Athens, whose words have outlived empires and still shape how we think about truth, justice, and the human soul. It is through him that Atlantis first took form on parchment, and it is in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, that we encounter its earliest description. To understand Atlantis, we must first understand how Plato wove it into his philosophy, whether as history, allegory, or a vision meant to linger just beyond certainty. Plato wrote in the 4th century BCE, during a time of intellectual flowering in Athens. The city, still haunted by the shadows of war and political change, had become the stage for debates about morality, politics, and the nature of reality itself. In the cool courtyards of the academy, Plato gathered students to listen, reflect, and question. His dialogues, framed as conversations between his teacher Socrates and other voices, were designed not simply to instruct but to provoke thought, to draw the mind toward deeper truths. Into this landscape, he introduced the tale of Atlantis, a story that seemed almost out of place, like a myth whispered in the middle of a philosophical argument. The tale comes to us first in Timaeus. In this dialogue, Socrates is joined by Critias, Hermocrates, and Timaeus to discuss the ideal state, the nature of the universe, and the place of humanity within it. It is here that Critias introduces a story passed down, he claims, through generations of his family, originating from the wisdom of Egyptian priests. The priests told of a land beyond the pillars of Heracles, what we today call the Strait of Gibraltar. This land, Atlantis, was described as larger than Libya and Asia combined, a mighty power that once challenged the known world. In one sweeping moment, Plato pulls us from familiar world of Greece into a vision of a civilization vast, organized, and extraordinary. Atlantis, according to Critias' account, was not a mere island but an empire. It was said to have possessed magnificent cities, arranged with mathematical precision. Its capital glowed with concentric rings of land and water, connected by bridges and adorned with temples. There were harbors filled with ships, walls plated with metals, and a palace of dazzling splendor. The kings of Atlantis ruled with laws inscribed upon an ancient pillar, governing a society that combined technological brilliance with immense wealth. This vision of perfection was both enchanting and unsettling. It showed humanity not as fragile or primitive, but as capable of near-divine creation. And yet, even as the story unfolded, Plato's voice carried a shadow. For the Atlanteans, though mighty, grew arrogant. Their hunger for conquest reached toward Greece itself, threatening Athens. In this detail, many scholars see Plato's deeper purpose. Athens, though smaller, represented virtue, courage, and balance. Atlantis, for all its brilliance, represented the danger of excess, of power unrestrained by wisdom. In the narrative, Athens stood firm, repelling Atlantis' aggression. And then, as if by divine will, Atlantis fell. Earthquakes shook the land, the sea rose, and in a single day and night, the island sank beneath the waves, leaving only memory behind. Here lies the paradox of Plato's Atlantis. On the surface, it reads like a history passed down from Egypt. Yet beneath that, it shimmers with allegory. Was Plato truly recording an ancient memory of a lost civilization? Or was he, as many believe, constructing a parable to illustrate the fall of society corrupted by pride? To answer, this is to peer into the very heart of Plato's method. He was never content with simple storytelling. Every myth he employed, from the allegory of the cave to the myth of O, was meant to reflect deeper truths about humanity. Atlantis may have been no different, a mirror, a warning, a reminder that greatness without virtue leads only to ruin. And yet, if Plato's intent was allegory, why the detail? Why the care in describing Atlantis' geography, its harbors, its concentric rings of canals, its abundance of elephants and precious metals? Why give it not just grandeur but specificity? It is this richness that has fueled curiosity for centuries. An allegory might not need such embellishment, yet Plato gave Atlantis the breath of reality. He gave it names, laws, landscapes. He gave it a death as sudden as any natural disaster remembered in human memory. Perhaps this was a genius of the tale, to blur allegory and history so perfectly that the listener cannot disentangle them. Consider the role of Critias, the character who relates the story. Plato frames the account as something heard, not invented, a tale preserved by Egyptian priests, passed to Solon, the great lawmaker of Athens, and then down through family lineage to Critias himself. This structure lends Atlantis a curious authority, as if Plato were not creating but merely transmitting a memory older than Greece itself. In this way, Atlantis is positioned not as Greek invention, but as a wisdom borrowed from the cradle of civilization along the Nile. The Egyptians, with their own deep memory of floods and dynasties, lend gravity to the tale. Yet scholars remind us that Plato's dialogues were not meant to be history books. They were philosophy wrapped in narrative. And so Atlantis may simply have been his way of illustrating the themes most dear to him, the tension between hubris and humility, between the glitter of material success and the quiet strength of moral virtue. The fall of Atlantis, then, is not only a dramatic ending but a lesson whispered through time. Civilizations, no matter how great, stand only as long as they honor justice, balance, and the limits set by nature. Still, the mystery lingers. What if Plato himself was not certain? What if he, too, was torn between allegory and memory? Ancient societies carried with them flood myths and tales of lands swallowed by the sea. Plato, a philosopher deeply attuned to the wisdom of older cultures, may have heard echoes of real disasters, the eruption of Thera, the drowning of coastal lands, the sudden ruin that nature can bring. Perhaps he wove these fragments into the fabric of his philosophy, binding truth and imagination into one inseparable thread. As we lean closer to Plato's words, we feel the weight of duality. Atlantis is both a parable and a possibility. To dismiss it as pure fiction is to ignore the detail and depth with which it is described. To accept it as pure history is to overlook Plato's philosophical purpose. And so it floats, like an island half seen through mist, never solid, never vanished. The genius of Plato was not to answer questions, but to leave them open, so that each generation would return to them anew. From this first written memory, Atlantis entered the bloodstream of human imagination. It was no longer just a whisper of myth. It had a place in the works of one of history's greatest philosophers. That fact alone ensured it would endure, regardless of whether it was true. Plato did not merely describe a lost city. He gave birth to an eternal mystery. His words were like seeds cast into the ocean, carried by currents, waiting to surface in the minds of future dreamers. And so, as we leave Plato's Athens behind, we carry with us the paradox he set in motion. Atlantis is memory. Atlantis is allegory. Atlantis is something in between. The story now stretches beyond him, into older echoes, into myths and fragments from civilizations long before his time. Plato gave the world its first written vision of Atlantis, but the question remains, was he inventing, or was he remembering something already whispered across ages? With that question glowing like a candle in the dark, we turn next to the echoes that existed before Plato himself. For Atlantis may not have been born in his mind alone. It may have been an inheritance from stories older than Greece, older even than written history, murmured from cultures that lived and died long before Athens first looked to the sea. Long before Plato's dialogues were set down in ink, long before the academy became a gathering place for minds in pursuit of truth, the world had already been whispering stories of lands swallowed by water. These stories rose not from philosophy but from memory, woven into myths and carried in the voices of priests, poets, and storytellers. When we lean carefully into the silence of the past, we begin to hear faint echoes that sound remarkably like Atlantis, though they bear other names, other shapes. They are fragments scattered across cultures, clues that suggest Plato may not have invented Atlantis from nothing, but rather reawaken a memory that humanity had been carrying for millennia. Among the Egyptians, to whom Plato himself attributed the tale, there lived a deep tradition of flood stories and vanished ages. The Nile itself, with its rhythmic floods, had taught the Egyptians to see water as both giver and taker of life. Priests preserved long lists of dynasties, stories of gods who ruled before men, and accounts of disasters that reshaped the land. The Egyptian priest in Plato's story tells Solon, a lawgiver of Athens, that Athens itself had stood against Atlantis in a time so distant that Greek memory had forgotten it. Whether this was literal or allegorical, the Egyptian voice gave the story weight. Egypt was ancient even to the Greeks, its monuments already older than anything in Athens, its priests keepers of time that reached back to the dawn of civilization. If Atlantis lived in their records, then perhaps it was more than mere invention. But Egypt was not alone in remembering lost lands. To the east, in Mesopotamia, the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians all preserved myths of great floods. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest written stories, describes a flood sent by the gods to wash away mankind. Within that story, a man named Utnapishtim survives by building a vessel, preserving life, and carrying forward memory. Though this tale speaks not of a sunken island, it resonates with the same themes: a powerful civilization undone by forces greater than itself, a world reset by water, and the lingering memory of what once was. Further west, in the Mediterranean world, echoes grow sharper. Consider the Minoans of Crete, a people whose culture flourished 1,000 years before Plato. They built palaces at Knossos, ruled the seas with fleets, and created art that glowed with color and movement. Then, suddenly, their world collapsed. The eruption of a volcano at Thera, modern-day Santorini, around 1600 BCE unleashed destruction on a scale hard to imagine. Ash darkened the skies, tidal waves struck the coast, and entire communities were erased. To those who lived in its aftermath, it must have felt like the wrath of the gods, a world swallowed in a single night. When Plato later described Atlantis' sudden sinking beneath the waves, could he have been echoing stories still remembered dimly from this disaster? The parallels are haunting. A seafaring people, advanced in art and architecture, undone by the fury of nature and left only as fragments beneath the sea. In the myths of Greece itself, the sea was always both pathway and peril. The gods of Olympus often punished hubris through water. Poseidon, lord of the oceans, could raise storms to shatter fleets or shake the land with quakes. The story of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who survived the great flood sent by Zeus, tells of a world drowned and remade. This Greek flood myth mirrors those of Mesopotamia and the Near East, suggesting that across cultures, humanity carried a memory of overwhelming waters. Atlantis, then, might not have been a singular story, but the Greek expression of a truth recognized everywhere, that civilizations are fragile before the sea. Beyond the Mediterranean, other echoes call from distant shores. In the ancient myth of India, the story of Manu describes a great flood in which the first man is saved by a fish, carrying the seeds of life into a new age. In the Americas, long before Europeans arrived, indigenous peoples told of lands lost beneath waves and great flood that reshaped the earth. Among the Maya and Aztec, cycles of creation and destruction were preserved, each age ending in catastrophe. Even in the northern sagas of the Norse, the sea was seen as a devourer, with the final doom of Ragnarok bringing the flood of all floods. Different cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, yet united in memory of water that takes as easily as it gives. What are we to make of these countless echoes? Are they evidence that Atlantis was real, that a civilization truly fell and its memory was carried like a ghost across cultures? Or are they the universal dreams of humanity, shaped by floods and disasters that each region experienced in its own way? Hey, again, we find the duality that makes Atlantis so enduring. It is at once unique and universal, a story that belongs to Plato but also to the entire human race. When Plato wrote of Atlantis, he may have been drawing from this well of ancient echoes. Perhaps the Egyptian priests he described were not inventing but recalling stories already old when their temples were young. Perhaps travelers carried tales of vanished coasts, drowned islands, and sunken land from one shore to another, weaving them into local memory. Or perhaps Plato, the philosopher, collected the fragments of myth and shaped them into a single vision, a vision that would speak not only to his own time but to every time. There is something profoundly human in this layering of myth upon myth. Each culture, gazing at the restless sea, saw both promise and threat. The ocean carried ships, goods, and ideas, but it could also rise in fury and erase entire worlds. To tell stories of drowned lands was not only to remember disasters, but to make sense of them, to give shape to the terror of nature's power. Atlantis fits into this pattern seamlessly, a magnificent people undone by their own hubris and by the sea that both sustained and destroyed them. And so, as we step gently out of Plato's Greece and into the deeper past, we begin to see Atlantis not as a solitary tale but as part of a chorus. Each voice sings of loss, of civilizations undone, of water as both cradle and grave. Together, these stories form the background against which Plato painted his vision. He may have been the first to name Atlantis, but he was not the first to feel its presence. The whispers were already there, carried by waves, by myths, by memory. What remains most mysterious is how these echoes converge. Is there a single origin, a real event so vast and devastating that it imprinted itself across continents? Or is the universality of flood myths simply the reflection of a shared vulnerability, humanity everywhere knowing the power of water? We cannot know for certain, but the resonance itself is enough to keep us listening. Atlantis belongs both to history and to dream, both to one culture and to all. From these ancient echoes, we now move toward a new horizon. Having explored the myth that set the stage before Plato, we turn next to the geography of imagination, the maps, coastlines, and oceans where seekers have tried to place Atlantis. For even though it began in whispers, humanity has always wanted to pin the dream onto the world itself, to say not only what Atlantis was, but where it might still lie waiting beneath the waves. From the moment Plato's words first described Atlantis as a mighty island lying beyond the pillars of Heracles, listeners and readers have felt compelled to ask a simple question: where? If the story was not entirely allegory, then surely such a vast land must have had a place in the world's geography. This impulse, to pin the dream of Atlantis onto a map, has carried across centuries. Scholars, explorers, mystics, and adventurers have all searched coastlines, drawn maps, and charted seas in the hope of finding the island's true location. The geography of Atlantis, then, is not just about seas and continents. It is about the human desire to make myth tangible, to tether imagination to the earth. Plato gave us a starting point. Atlantis lay beyond the pillars of Heracles, the ancient name for the Strait of Gibraltar. For the Greeks, this strait marked the edge of the known world, the gateway from the Mediterranean into the vast Atlantic. Beyond its stretched waters few dared to sail, a mystery that seemed infinite. To say Atlantis lay there was to place it not only in the sea but at the border between known and unknown, between what could be charted and what belonged to imagination. It is fitting that the first coordinates of Atlantis were set upon a threshold. From this clue, countless theories have spread like waves. Many believe Plato's description points directly to the Atlantic Ocean itself, giving the lost city its name. The most famous suggestion places Atlantis somewhere in the mid-Atlantic, perhaps on islands that were once larger and later submerged. The Azores, a chain of volcanic islands, have long been candidates. Rising steeply from the ocean floor, they seem like the scattered tips of something greater. Their remote beauty, shrouded often in mist, has inspired generations of writers to see in them the peaks of Atlantis, still standing above the waves while the rest sleeps below. But the Atlantic is vast, and the imagination even vaster. Some have placed Atlantis near the Caribbean, in the warm blue waters where Cuba and the Bahamas stretch like stepping stones across the sea. The Bimini Road, a curious underwater formation of stone blocks, has been cited as evidence by those who believe Atlantis may have stood there. Though science often explains such formations as natural, the allure of man-made ruins beneath clear tropical water is irresistible. It is easy to drift into visions of harbors and temples lying silent beneath the waves, their columns embraced by coral. Others have searched the coast of the Mediterranean itself, arguing that Plato's Beyond the Pillars might not have meant across the Atlantic, but rather to lands within the familiar basin of Europe and Africa. Here the island of Santorini, once known as Thera, rises again as a candidate. The eruption that devastated the Minoan could explain much of Plato's account. A seafaring people advance in trade and art, undone by natural disaster. Santorini's ring-shaped caldera mirrors Plato's concentric rings of Atlantis' capital, adding to the temptation of identification. In this version, Atlantis was not a distant world but a memory of a neighbor, transformed into legend through time. Even more daring theories push Atlantis to the farthest corners of the globe. Some have claimed it lies beneath the frozen waste of Antarctica, arguing that shifting ice once covered a great civilization. Others place it in South America, where the highlands of Bolivia or Peru could fit Plato's description of a land rich in metals and extraordinary in culture. These theories stretch imagination far beyond Plato's original hints, yet they reveal the power of Atlantis as a symbol. It can be made to fit almost anywhere, because it is less about geography than about the hunger to discover. The ocean itself fuels this desire. Even in modern times, with satellites mapping every continent and sonar scanning the seabed, the sea still keeps secrets. Mountains taller than Everest lie hidden beneath its surface, trenches deeper than any valley on land. Entire landscapes remain unvisited, their silence unbroken. The thought that a civilization might sleep there, untouched for thousands of years, awakens both awe and yearning. Each theory of Atlantis' location is less about accuracy than about our relationship to mystery. The sea reminds us that even in an age of knowledge, much remains unknown. Consider, too, the shifting of continents, the slow dance of tectonic plates. Land that was once dry lies drowned today, while ocean floors have risen into mountains. Doggerland, once a vast plain connecting Britain to Europe, now rests beneath the North Sea, its memory preserved only in artifacts dredged by fishermen. If such a land could vanish within the span of human habitation, might not greater lands have disappeared in older times? Science reminds us that geography itself is impermanent, and this impermanence breathes life into Atlantis' possibility. Yet, for every theory that insists on a location, there is a reminder that Plato may never have meant Atlantis to be found. By placing it beyond the Pillars of Heracles, he may have been signaling not a point on a map but a point in imagination, a land just out of reach, always beyond. The geography of Atlantis, then, is both real and symbolic. It exists in the tension between coordinates and metaphor, between the maps we draw and the dreams we carry. And perhaps that is a true geography of a dream. It is not fixed but fluid, like water itself. Atlantis has appeared on maps across centuries, sometimes boldly drawn, sometimes hidden in margins with the words terra incognita. Each cartographer who inked its name was not only charting the sea, but charting hope, the hope that beyond the horizon lay something extraordinary. Even as science erased such lands from official charts, the dream remained, whispered in literature, revived in theories, reborn in imaginations. When we trace Atlantis on the globe, we are really tracing our own desire to believe that the world holds more than we know. That desire is not diminished by time or by discovery. It is why divers still descend into the depths, why explorers scan the seabed, why writers set their stories in world beneath the waves. Geography becomes a canvas, and Atlantis is the image we paint upon it, half real, half dream. As we close this section, the maps we hold are less about latitude and longitude, and more about longing itself. Atlantis may lie in the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, or in no place at all. Its geography is not only of the earth but of the imagination. To search for it is to admit that we crave mystery, that we are drawn not only to what is known but to what forever slips just out of reach. And so, with maps still unrolled before us and waves whispering of unseen coasts, we step toward the next question. If Atlantis was a dream placed upon geography, could it also be a memory of disaster? To answer this, we must look not only at stories and maps, but at the cataclysms that have shaken the earth, volcanoes, floods, quakes, and the sudden ruin of entire peoples. In the next part of our journey, we explore whether Atlantis might not simply be allegory or imagination, but the poetic memory of cataclysm itself. When we hear the tale of Atlantis, it is not only the grandeur of its holes and harbors that lingers in the imagination, it is the suddenness of its fall. In Plato's account, the island sank in a single day and night of misfortune, swallowed by the sea. This detail gives the story its lasting weight. Splendor alone would have made Atlantis a curiosity. Disaster makes it unforgettable. The image of a thriving civilization undone in moments touches something deep within us, something both fearful and familiar. For woven into the memory of humanity are countless stories of floods, eruptions, and quakes, of nights when the earth shook and the sea rose, reshaping the world in an instant. Atlantis, in this light, becomes less a single story and more a reflection of the great cataclysms that echo through human history. Flood myths are among the oldest stories humans have told, and they appear across cultures as if imprinted into our shared memory. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh describes a flood so vast it covered mountains, sent by the gods to cleanse the world. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah builds an ark to survive the waters that engulf creation. In India, the ancient tale of Manu recounts a great deluge from which he alone escapes with the guidance of divine fish. In the Americas, in Oceania, in Africa, stories of floods appear again and again, like ripples across time. Though told in different tongues and with different symbols, the core remains the same. The waters rise, the land vanishes, and the survivors carry forward a memory. Could Plato's Atlantis simply be one of these flood stories, retold in Greek form? It is possible. The Greeks themselves knew of great disasters. The eruption of Thera around 1600 BCE had been a trauma for the region, even if Plato lived 1,000 years later. Such an event, where an island literally tore itself apart, where the sea rushed into the caldera with fury, where waves spread across the Aegean, could hardly fail to leave an imprint. The destruction of the Minoan civilization, often tied to this eruption, might have been remembered dimly through generations, finally surfacing in Plato's tale as a city lost to the sea. But it is not only volcanoes that can bring ruin. Earthquakes have shaken cities into rubble with terrifying suddenness. In the Mediterranean, tectonic forces make quakes a constant possibility. Imagine a city of marble temples and busy harbors struck without warning, buildings collapsing, docks breaking apart, seawater surging into the fractures. To people of antiquity, such destruction must have felt like divine punishment, a reminder that no achievement could withstand the fury of the earth. When Plato described Atlantis sinking in a day and night, he may have been recalling the violence of earthquakes as much as the power of floods. Science, too, gives us reason to see truth in the memory of cataclysm. Across the world's coasts, geology reveals signs of sudden inundation, layers of sand and silt far inland, the marks of ancient tsunamis. These waves, sometimes triggered by quakes or eruptions, can erase entire communities. The Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004 and the Japanese tsunami of 2011 show us in modern times what such forces can do. Ships carried onto rooftops, cities swept away, coastlines transformed. Now imagine such events occurring thousands of years ago, when written record was scarce. Survivors would pass a memory not in numbers and charts, but in stories. And as stories do, they would grow with each telling, until they spoke not only of disaster but of civilizations lost beneath the waves. This is why Atlantis resonates so strongly. It is both unique and universal. It is one city, richly described, yet it stands for all the cities ever undone by nature. Its fate mirrors the fragility of our own. In telling of Atlantis, Plato gave shape to a truth humanity has always known, that the earth can change suddenly, and what seems eternal may vanish in a night. Yet we must ask, was Plato truly recounting memory, or was he crafting allegory? In his dialogues, Atlantis is less about geography and more about morality. It is a tale of a people who grew proud, who defied balance, and who were punished. The flood, in this sense, becomes symbolic, a cleansing of arrogance, a reminder that hubris invites ruin. But symbols are rarely created from nothing. Even if Plato used Atlantis as allegory, he may have drawn upon whispers of real disaster, the collective memory of floods and quakes that his audience would recognize. The best symbols live close to truth, and Atlantis may have been one such case, a moral lesson clothed in the memory of catastrophe. The fascinating question, then, is whether Atlantis was only a metaphor, or whether it preserves some echo of events that truly happened. Some argue that Plato exaggerated a real memory, expanding a local tragedy into a global myth. Others believe he invented it entirely, using geography and disaster to cloak philosophy in vivid imagery. The line between invention and memory is often blurred, especially when stories pass through centuries. What remains clear is that the sinking of Atlantis feels real because sinking, in one form or another, is part of the human past. Beyond disaster, there's also the emotional power of floods. To lose a city is not only to lose walls and streets, it is to lose a way of life. Survivors carry that grief, and in telling stories, they ensure the grief does not vanish. Atlantis, whether fact or fiction, expresses that grief. It is a lament for what was splendid but is now gone, a way of saying that no matter how great our works, they remain vulnerable to the forces beyond our control. In this sense, Atlantis is less a tale of punishment and more a song of fragility, one that continues to move us because it feels so very human. Even today, modern science cannot silence the pull of this narrative. The melting of glacier, the rising of seas, the shaking of the earth remind us that cataclysm is not confined to the past. We know more now. We measure and predict, yet we remain small before the planet shifts. Atlantis whispers across time that civilizations, no matter how mighty, are not immune. That whisper, spoken gently in the night, is not meant to frighten but to humble, to remind us of scale. And so, as we close this part of our journey, we are left with a haunting thought. Perhaps Atlantis is not only a story of what was lost, but a story of what can always be lost again. Each flood myth, each ruin beneath the waves, each tremor in the earth tells us that the line between stability and collapse is thinner than we wish to believe. In remembering Atlantis, we remember that fragility, and perhaps we prepare ourselves, at least in spirit, for the mysteries still to come. In the next section, we step away from cataclysm itself and turn our gaze toward the seekers. For Atlantis has survived not only in myth and philosophy, but in the restless pursuit of explorers who long to prove it real. From sailors to scholars, from mystics to modern divers, the story has lured countless souls to follow its whisper. To understand the endurance of Atlantis, we must now follow those who sought it, mapping not the land beneath the sea but the longing within the human heart. The story of Atlantis did not end with Plato's dialogues. If it had remained only within the pages of his writings, perhaps it would have been studied as a curious allegory, a philosophical parable with no further life beyond his classroom. But something in the story reached beyond philosophy, igniting a hunger that has persisted across centuries. Atlantis became not merely a tale to read, but a mystery to solve. And so began the long history of seekers, explorers, mystics, scholars, and dreamers, each drawn by the promise of uncovering a world lost beneath the waves. Their journeys reveal as much about human longing as they do about the legend itself. In the age of exploration, when sailors began to cross oceans once thought impossible, the tale of Atlantis found new resonance. To step beyond the pillars of Heracles into the open Atlantic was to enter the very waters where Plato said Atlantis lay. As caravels cut across the horizon and maps expanded, whispers of lost islands accompanied them. Sailors told of strange lands glimpsed in fog, of coasts that appeared and vanished, of sounds from beneath the sea. Some of these accounts may have been mirages or misunderstood natural phenomena, but to minds already primed by Plato's tale, they seemed like glimpses of a vanished world. Christopher Columbus himself, though seeking a new route to Asia, heard stories from the inhabitants of the Canary Islands about lands far to the west that had sunk long ago. These islands, lying on the Atlantic frontier, were often linked in imagination to Atlantis. It is said that Columbus carried with him not only charts and provisions, but also legends, perhaps thinking that his voyage might reveal more than new continents, that it might uncover the ruins of a forgotten one. The irony is that his arrival in the Americas gave rise to a new wave of speculation. Some believed the native peoples he encountered were descendants of Atlanteans, their cultures shaped by fragments of a once great civilization. As centuries passed, explorers gave way to scholars, and Atlantis shifted from the sea into books. In the 17th century, the scholar Athanasius Kircher published a map that depicted Atlantis as a large island in the Atlantic, bridging Europe and the Americas. Though based more on interpretation than evidence, his map gave the legend fresh authority. To see Atlantis drawn in ink, as if it were as real as Spain or Africa, strengthened its presence in the European imagination. Maps hold power. They transform dreams into something we can point to. Kircher's Atlantis was not merely a myth but a place suspended between continents, waiting to be rediscovered. But not all seekers were guided by charts and compasses. Many turned inward, into the realm of mysticism and esoteric tradition. For them, Atlantis was not only a lost land but a lost wisdom. In the 19th century, writers like Ignatius Donnelly brought Atlantis into public conversation once more with his book Atlantis, The Antediluvian World. Donnelly argued passionately that Atlantis was the source of all great civilizations, the fountain from which knowledge had spread to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond. His ideas were bold, speculative, and not always supported by evidence, yet they struck a deep chord. Atlantis became more than a curiosity. It became a grand theory of human history, suggesting a hidden unity behind the rise of cultures. From Donnelly's influence grew a wave of spiritual interpretations. Theosophists like Helena Blavatsky spoke of Atlantis as a stage in the evolution of humanity, a place where ancient souls had lived before moving on to new incarnations. Edgar Cayce, the American mystic known as a sleeping prophet, claimed in trance readings that Atlantis had once been real, that its people had harnessed advanced technology, and that fragments of its ruins would one day be found near the Bahamas. His words inspired countless followers, and even today divers explore the waters near Bimini, hoping to prove Cayce right. This blending of exploration and mysticism gave Atlantis a dual life. On one hand, it remained a geographical quest, an island to be found. On the other, it became a spiritual symbol, an origin point of wisdom and a cautionary tale of misuse. Those who sought it with ships and maps were mirrored by those who sought it with meditation and prophecy. The legend stretched wide enough to hold both pursuits, feeding the curiosity of scholars and the yearning of dreamers alike. The 20th century brought new seekers, armed now with submarines, sonar, and eventually satellites. Expeditions combed the ocean floor, not only for Atlantis but for any trace of lost lands. The discovery of ancient shipwrecks and submerged settlements, though not Atlantis itself, show that the sea indeed hides fragments of history. Off the coast of India, ruins were found beneath the waves. Near Japan, the Yonaguni Formation sparked debate about whether they were natural or man-made. Each discovery rekindled hope. If such places could survive underwater, perhaps Atlantis too lay waiting in silence. Yet with every expedition that failed to find definitive proof, Atlantis slipped further into the realm of mystery. And still, the seekers continued. Because perhaps the search was never only about finding stone walls or streets. It was about the act of seeking itself. To pursue Atlantis is to join a lineage of explorers stretching back to Plato's own students, to sail not just across seas but across the edge between known and unknown. And here lies the quiet truth. Atlantis endures not because it has been found, but because it is not. Its absence is its greatest power. Each failure to locate it ensures that the next seeker may try again, that the story remains alive. Atlantis whispers differently to each generation, sometimes as history, sometimes as allegory, sometimes as prophecy. The explorers, the mystics, the scholars, and the divers are all part of its story, bound not by what they discover but by the longing they share. As we drift out of this section, we see the seekers still at sea, still scanning the horizon, still lowering their gaze into the dark waters. The ships may be more advanced, the maps more precise, the instruments more refined, but the yearning is the same as it ever was. Atlantis is not only about what lies beneath the waves, it is about what lies within us, the eternal call to seek beyond the horizon. In the next part of our journey, we turn from the seekers themselves to the question of what they believe Atlantis contained. For Atlantis is never just a lost land. It is imagined as a lost culture, rich in wisdom and technology. To understand why the legend has endured so long, we must look at these visions of Atlantean society, their marvels, their advances, and their warnings. When we picture Atlantis, it is rarely just an island, it is an entire world of marvels. The name alone conjures shining temples, advanced ships, palaces of stone and metal, and a people whose knowledge surpassed that of their neighbors. Plato described concentric rings of land and sea, connected by channels and adorned with bridges, a city laid out with perfection that seemed beyond his time. To listeners then, and to us now, these details raise a tantalizing question. Did Atlantis reflect the memory of an extraordinary culture, or was it only the architecture of Plato's imagination? Plato's account speaks of wealth beyond measure. He tells us that Atlantis was rich in resources, that metals both common and rare were abundant, and that the land yielded everything needed for flourishing society. Most strikingly, he mentions a mysterious substance called orichalcum, a metal more precious than all but gold. Its name has inspired endless speculation. Was it a real alloy, now lost to time, or a symbolic creation meant to suggest a civilization that gleamed with unmatched splendor? Some believe orichalcum might have been copper, brass, or even a forgotten mixture of minerals. Whatever it was, in the story it became the very symbol of Atlantean brilliance, a material that marked them as unique. The city itself is described with a level of sophistication unusual for ancient accounts. Bridges spanned the canals, walls gleamed with metal plates. Temples rose in honor of Poseidon, adorned with statues and carvings. The central Acropolis was said to house the greatest palace, where kings gathered in council, their walls covered in shimmering alloys. To imagine such a city is to step into a vision of order and grandeur, a place where human design seemed to echo cosmic harmony. If the Greeks marveled at their own Acropolis, how much greater must a vision of Atlantis have appeared, a metropolis planned on a scale the world had not seen. Beyond architecture, Plato described a culture of seafaring power. The Atlanteans were masters of the ocean, sending fleets across waters, establishing influence over distant lands. They are portrayed as both wealthy and ambitious, extending their rule beyond their island until their arrogance drew divine disfavor. In this, Atlantis becomes a mirror of empire itself, the rise, the expansion, and the inevitable decline. Yet within the grandeur, we glimpse the allure of a civilization whose ships may have crossed seas that Greeks themselves feared. If true, such mastery would suggest knowledge of navigation and geography long before history records it. For those who read Atlantis as memory rather than myth, these details point to a forgotten age of advancement. Some suggest the Atlanteans had technologies unknown to other ancient peoples, complex engineering, mastery of metallurgy, perhaps even harnessing of natural forces. Writers inspired by Plato have imagined Atlantean energy drawn from crystals, devices that could channel the Earth's magnetism, or machines powered by the sun. Though such ideas reach far beyond what Plato described, they reveal the hunger to believe that Atlantis was not only lost but advanced, that it held secrets humanity has since forgotten. Skeptics, of course, remind us that such visions may tell us more about modern imagination than about ancient reality. When we dream of Atlantean machines, we project our own fascination with progress onto a canvas of myth. Yet even skeptics admit that ancient societies sometimes achieved wonders we still struggle to explain. The pyramids of Egypt, the megaliths of Stonehenge, the precision of Incan stonework, all remind us that the past held knowledge we do not fully understand. Might Atlantis have been another such case, an advanced culture erased by time, remembered only in fragments? There is another way to read the story, not as literal memory, but as allegory of balance. Atlantis is portrayed as a society that began in harmony, its kings ruling with wisdom, its people enjoying abundance. But over time, wealth bred pride, and pride bred corruption. The Atlanteans grew greedy, their desire for conquest overshadowing their virtues. It was then, Plato says, that they lost favor and were destroyed. In this sense, the culture of Atlantis is less about architecture and more about morality. It is a lesson about the fragility of civilizations that lose sight of balance. Their technology, their wealth, their power, all could not save them from the consequences of hubris. And yet, allegory does not erase mystery. Even if Plato invented Atlantis to illustrate moral decay, he drew upon images that felt plausible to his audience. The idea of canals, ships, metals, and temples was not outlandish. It was compelling, believable, the kind of detail that made his story endure. A parable wrapped in the clothing of reality is far stronger than one left in abstraction. That is why we still picture Atlantean harbors, streets, and palaces when we hear the name today. The persistence of Atlantis in popular imagination owes much to these visions of culture and technology. A sunken city of stone columns alone might not have held our attention for millennia. But a city that also whispers of lost wisdom, forgotten metals, and powers beyond our reach, that is a story too alluring to let go. From the mystics of the 19th century to the adventurers of today, the promise of hidden knowledge has been as captivating as the promise of sunken ruins. Whether Atlantis was myth or memory, its imagined culture continues to inspire. Artists paint shining cities rising from the sea. Writers craft tales of Atlanteans with wisdom far beyond our own. Filmmakers bring to life crystal towers, underwater palaces, and technology fused with magic. These creations are not attempts to prove Plato right. They are responses to the hunger his story awakened, the hunger for civilization both advanced and mysterious, a mirror of what we are and what we might become. And so, Atlantis stands at the threshold between myth and memory, between invention and history. Its culture is described with just enough detail to feel real, and just enough mystery to invite endless speculation. Whether we see it as allegory, as ancient memory, or as prophecy of cycles yet to come, the image of Atlantis remains powerful. As this section closes, We are left with a question that blends wonder with humility. If Atlantis truly existed, what wisdom did it hold, and what mistakes did it make? Did it reach heights of knowledge only to fall through arrogance, as Plato suggested? Or was it simply another society undone by the Earth's unpredictable forces? Either way, its imagined culture continues to whisper to us across time, reminding us of both our potential and our limits. In the next stage of our journey, we will turn from Atlantean culture to the echoes it has left across other myths and legends. For Atlantis is not alone in telling of golden ages lost and lands swallowed by the sea. To understand its power, we must place it among the chorus of stories humanity has carried through the centuries, stories of Lemuria, Mu, and other forgotten worlds that mirror the fate of Atlantis in different corners of the earth. Atlantis, though the most famous of lost civilizations, is not the only one whispered about in human tradition. Across the world, different cultures have carried their own legends of vanished continents, golden ages swallowed by the sea, or lands that slip beneath the horizon. These stories, scattered across languages and landscapes, form an echo chamber where Atlantis is not alone but joined by siblings, names like Lemuria and Mu, lands imagined as vast, advanced, and long forgotten. To trace these echoes is to discover that humanity seems unable to resist dreaming of worlds just out of reach, places both mysterious and familiar, embodying our longing for hidden origins. The tale of Lemuria arose not from Plato's writings, but from the world of 19th century science. In an age before plate tectonics explained how continents moved, scientists puzzled over the distribution of animals and plants across oceans. How could lemurs, for example, be found in both Madagascar and India but not in Africa? To explain such mysteries, zoologist Philip Sclater proposed a lost continent, which he named Lemuria, stretching across the Indian Ocean. Though meant as a scientific hypothesis rather than myth, the idea quickly escaped into imagination. Soon Lemuria was no longer a zoological explanation, but a civilization, an ancient home to peoples whose memory had been lost. Spiritual writers seized on Lemuria as they had with Atlantis. Theosophers described it as a cradle of humanity, a place where early spiritual beings lived before Atlantis rose. Lemurians were said to be tall, ethereal, and wise, dwelling in harmony with the earth until their land too was destroyed. Unlike Atlantis, which carried connotations of wealth and pride, Lemuria was often imagined as a gentler world, more mystical than technological. In this way, it served as a counterpoint to Atlantis, one civilization representing hubris and downfall, the other representing innocence and loss. Together they form a mythology of cycles, rises and falls, remembered through fragments of lore. The story of Mu followed a similar path. It began with the writings of Augustus Le Plongeon in the late 19th century, who misinterpreted Mayan texts and claimed they spoke of a great lost continent in the Pacific Ocean. He named it Mu and declared it the birthplace of humanity, the mother civilization from which Egypt, India, and others descended. Though scholars rejected his translations, the story of Mu gained a life of its own, especially after James Churchward expanded it in the early 20th century. Churchward described Mu as a vast Pacific land, home to millions, with a culture that predated all others. He spoke of temples, advanced knowledge, and a tragic destruction that left only fragments scattered among Polynesian islands. Though modern geology finds no evidence of such continents, the myths of Lemuria and Mu endure in popular imagination. They function not as scientific truths, but as symbols of yearning. Just as Atlantis asks us to wonder about civilizations beneath the Atlantic, Lemuria and Mu ask us to look to the Indian and Pacific Oceans as keepers of forgotten worlds. Their persistence reveals something deep in the human spirit. The belief that our story did not begin with the ruins we see, but with civilizations far older, washed away by time and tide. These echoes of lost lands appear outside Western narratives too. In Polynesian traditions, there are stories of Hawaii, a homeland across the sea from which the people came. In the Pacific, tales of sunken lands and vanished islands are common, as if the vastness of the ocean itself invites such stories. In Japan, legends speak of Awajije, an undersea palace, a place of beauty and timelessness beneath the waves. In Celtic lore, there is Avalon, the Isle of Apples, shrouded in mist, sometimes said to sink below the horizon only to rise again. In Wales, Cantar Gwaelod tells of a fertile kingdom drowned by the sea, its bells said to still be heard on quiet nights. These stories may not always name themselves as Atlantis, Lemuria, or Mu, but they share the same pattern, Lands lost, cultures gone, waters closing over them. What unites these legends is not geography but emotion. They all speak of longing for something precious that slipped away. Whether it is Atlantis with its gleaming walls, Lemuria with its mystical beings, Mu with its ancestral wisdom, or Celtic Isles veiled in mist, each tale touches the same chord, the belief that paradise once existed, and that we are living in its shadow. The flood myths of Mesopotamia and the Bible, the submerged kingdoms of folklore, the vanished continents of speculative science, they all intertwine, suggesting that memory and imagination are deeply linked when it comes to water and loss. Why do such stories persist? Perhaps because they mirror our own experience of impermanence. Cities crumble, forests vanish, coastlines change. Even in our lifetimes, we witness the disappearance of familiar places to storms, quakes, or human actions. If small losses wound us so deeply, how much greater the wound of entire lands erased? Myths of lost continents are, in a way, a collective elegy, a way of mourning not only what has gone before but what might yet be lost. And yet, there is also hope within them. For if such lands once existed, might they not be found again? The possibility of discovery gives these legends their enduring power. The diver who descends into the blue, the scholar who pores over maps, the mystic who dreams of past lives, all are moved by the promise that hidden beneath the waves lies not only history but wisdom. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, they are more than losses. They are invitations. Invitations to search, to imagine, to believe that the world is larger and more mysterious than we know. As we leave this section, we see that Atlantis is part of a larger chorus, its voice joined by many others across cultures and centuries. It is not alone in telling of a golden world undone. Rather, it stands as one among many variations of a deeper human theme, that what is most beautiful may be most fragile, and that the sea, in its silence, holds secrets of both wonder and sorrow. From here, our journey turns toward the earth itself. For while myths speak of sunken lands, science has uncovered real places swallowed by water, cities once thriving, now lying quiet on the seabed. To understand why Atlantis endures, we must look not only at imagined worlds, but the true ruins hidden beneath the waves. Across the world, beneath shallow bays and hidden within rivers, lie the ruins of cities swallowed by water. These are not myths spun by philosophers or mystics, but tangible remains, stones shaped by human hands, roads once trodden, temples where prayers rose to the sky. They remind us that while Atlantis may or may not have been real, the idea of civilizations lost to the sea is not a fantasy. History itself bears witness to how coastlines shift, how the earth trembles, and how waters rise to claim what once stood proud. One of the most haunting examples comes from the coast of Egypt. For centuries, sailors spoke of a vanished city near Alexandria, a place once bustling with trade and temples but gone without trace. In recent decades, divers discovered that the legends were true. The city of Heracleon, also called Thonis, lay submerged beneath the Mediterranean. Columns, statues, inscriptions, and fragments of daily life rest quietly on the seabed, preserved in silt. This was no imagined Atlantis, but a living city that had fallen victim to nature's slow violence, earthquakes, soil subsidence, and the ceaseless encroachment of the sea. Heracleon tells us something essential, that human settlements, even mighty ones, can vanish almost completely from memory in only a few centuries. Once a major port, rivaling Alexandria itself, it disappeared so thoroughly that it lived only in whispers until rediscovered by modern exploration. When divers carefully brushed silt from the face of a statue of Hapi, the Egyptian god of the Nile, it was as if the river itself had returned a memory too long buried. Further east, the Gulf of Cambay in India offers another extraordinary story. In the early 2000s, sonar scans revealed geometric patterns on the seabed, structures resembling walls, streets, and large platforms. Divers collected artifacts, including pottery fragments and tools, suggesting a human presence thousands of years ago. Some estimates, though contested, place these remains as old as 9,000 years, far older than known Indian civilizations. Whether these findings represent a vast forgotten city or the remnants of smaller settlements remains debated, but the possibility is tantalizing. If true, it would suggest that entire chapters of human history lie hidden beneath the oceans, unseen and unremembered. Similar tales unfold in Europe. Off the coast of Greece lies Pavlopetri, a submerged city that dates back over 5,000 years. Its streets, Houses and courtyards are still visible beneath the clear waters, making it one of the oldest underwater cities known. Unlike the grand myths of Atlantis, Petri was no great empire but a thriving coastal town, a reminder that even ordinary communities can be swept away by shifting seas. Its survival underwater, preserved almost like a photograph of the past, provides archaeologists with a rare window into daily life in the Bronze Age. In Wales, the legend of Cantor Gwaelod speaks of a fertile land lost to the sea. For centuries, people told of church bells still ringing beneath the waves. Along the coast of Cardigan Bay, at low tide, remnants of drowned forests can be seen, ancient tree stumps preserved in peat. While not a city of stone, these remains echo the legend, showing that the sea did indeed reclaim once inhabited land. Here again, myth and history intertwine. Memory of real environmental change becomes woven into folklore of kingdoms lost. Japan, too, holds its mysteries. Off the coast of Yonaguni, divers in the 1980s discovered massive stone formations resembling steps, terraces, and pyramids. Some argue they are natural formations shaped by geology, while others see evidence of deliberate carving. If human-made, these structures could be over 10,000 years old, pushing the story of civilization far back beyond conventional timelines. Whether nature's work or humanity's forgotten creation, the Yonaguni monument continues to fascinate, adding to the chorus of submerged enigmas. Even in more recent times, the sea has swallowed towns. In Italy, the Roman city of Baiae, once a luxurious retreat for the elite, gradually sank due to volcanic activity. Today, its mosaic floors, villas, and baths lie beneath the waters of the Bay of Naples, visited by divers who swim through silent holes once alive with voices. Similarly, in Jamaica, Port Royal, the infamous pirate haven, was destroyed in an earthquake in 1692, much of it plunging instantly into the sea. Survivors spoke of streets opening and the ocean rushing in, carrying ships, people, and buildings into the depths. Here the line between myth and fact blurs again. For in such catastrophes, the stories of instant destruction echo the suddenness of Atlantis' fall. Together, these submerged cities form a powerful reminder Atlantis is not alone. Whether or not Plato's tale was fact, the earth itself proves that entire cities, even empires, can vanish underwater. Nature, indifferent and immense, reshapes coastlines, swallows harbors, and hides history beneath waves. For archaeologists, each discovery is a fragment of proof that myth and memory often begin in reality, even if transformed by time. But there is something deeper than physical evidence at play. When we hear of Heraclean rising again from the silt, or Yonaguni's enigmatic steps beneath the ocean, we are stirred not just by history but by imagination. These sites invite us to ask, what else lies hidden? What ruins rest just beyond reach, their stones still waiting for light? If these known examples can vanish so completely, is it impossible to imagine that something like Atlantis could have once existed and been lost? These discoveries serve another role too. They anchor the myth. Atlantis may or may not have been real, but the idea of lands drowned by water is no fantasy. From Egypt to India, from Greece to Japan, the sea has always been a keeper of ruins. Each submerged city becomes a whisper, telling us that memory and mystery are never far apart. As we move forward, the question deepens. Are these echoes of Atlantis proof that Plato's story may have been rooted in truth, or simply reminders that his tale was part of a broader human awareness of how fragile civilization truly is? The answer is elusive, and yet the presence of real submerged cities keeps the possibility alive. From here, our journey shifts from ruins of stone to the myths of stone tablets and hidden maps. For even as archaeologists uncover sunken streets, seekers have long believed that ancient texts might still hold the coordinates of lost worlds. The next step in our exploration leads us into the realm of forgotten manuscripts and cryptic inscriptions, where Atlantis is sought not in the seabed but in the words of the ancients. Throughout history, seekers of Atlantis have not only gazed into the sea but also into the parchment of old maps and the faded ink of forgotten manuscripts. For as much as ruins speak through stone, there is a quieter, subtler trail of clues hidden in ancient documents. These are works that whisper of lands not marked on modern globes, of continents drawn in places where none should be, of knowledge that seems to surpass the times in which it was created. To hold such a map or to read such a manuscript is to glimpse a shadow of memory, perhaps echoing the same world Plato once described. Among the most famous of these documents is the Piri race map, created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral who pieced it together from older charts. The map is striking for many reasons, but what captures the imagination most is its depiction of South America's coastline, drawn with startling accuracy long before European explorers had charted it fully. Even more mysterious is a map suggestion of a southern landmass, which some interpret as Antarctica, drawn centuries before it was officially discovered. To those who dream of lost civilizations, such precision implies that Piri race drew from sources even older, perhaps inherited from forgotten age of advanced seafarers. Could these sources have been remnants of Atlantean knowledge, passed through generations and obscured by time? The Piri race map is not alone in its mysteries. The Errontius Phineas map of 1531 also depicts Antarctica, not as a frozen wasteland, but as if its coastlines were free of ice. If true, this would suggest knowledge of the continent's geography as it existed thousands of years ago, before ice buried its shores. Mainstream scholars attribute such depictions to speculation or coincidence, yet for those attuned to myth, these maps carry the weight of secret memory. They become more than curiosities. They are seen as fragments of an Atlantean cartography, hidden within Renaissance ink. Older still are the manuscripts and chronicles preserved in monasteries and libraries. Medieval and Renaissance thinkers sometimes recorded vague references to lands across the ocean, spoken of by sailors or drawn from ancient texts no longer extant. These mentions are fleeting, but their persistence is notable. They suggest a lineage of rumor, of knowledge carried forward in whispers, transformed as it passed through centuries. When placed alongside Plato's dialogues, these scattered notes form a kind of mosaic, each shard incomplete, but together hinting at a larger design. Even Plato himself may not have invented Atlantis from whole cloth. Some scholars suggest he drew upon Egyptian records. In his dialogues, Plato speaks of Solon, the Athenian statesman who traveled to Egypt and was told of a great civilization destroyed by water. The priest of Sais, according to this account, preserved records of floods and ancient wars far older than Greek memory. Though we cannot confirm the existence of such scrolls, the possibility stays the imagination. What if Egyptian archives once contained references to lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules, to empires now drowned? Could fragments of Atlantean history have been preserved there, only to vanish in the fires and lootings that destroyed so many ancient libraries? The tragedy of lost manuscripts haunts this search. The Library of Alexandria, said to contain hundreds of thousands of scrolls, was destroyed in waves of calamity, fire, neglect, conquest. What knowledge may have perished there? Was there a scroll describing the Western Ocean, or a log of ancient sailors who ventured into the Atlantic? Was Plato's account one of the few fragments that survived from a much larger record? We cannot know, and the uncertainty itself becomes part of the mystery. It is not only Greco-Roman or Egyptian traditions that matter here. Ancient Indian texts, such as the Vedas and the Puranas, speak of great floods, vanished kingdoms, and lands swallowed by the sea. In the Tamil tradition, there is mention of Kumarikal Dam, a vast continent south of India, lost beneath the waves. Though largely considered myth, these accounts parallel Atlantis in striking ways. Manuscripts that describe golden ages, cataclysms, and migration suggest a shared memory across cultures of civilizations undone by water. The search for Atlantis through maps and manuscripts thus becomes a search for echoes. We cannot hold Atlantis in our hands, but we can touch the parchment, see the ink, trace the lines of coastlines drawn centuries too soon. These fragments remind us that knowledge flows like a river. It carries silt and debris, it loses clarity, it disappears underground, but sometimes it resurfaces in unexpected places. A chart drawn by a sailor in the Ottoman Empire, a myth preserved in a Tamil manuscript, a Greek philosopher's dialogue, all might be tributaries of the same lost memory. There is, of course, skepticism. Historians caution that ancient maps are riddled with errors, distortions, and imaginative additions. Sailors often drew coastlines from rumor rather than measurement. Lands like Antillia and HY Brazil appeared on maps for centuries, not because they were real, but because mariners repeated them until they seemed true. If ancient manuscripts and maps kept the memory of lost lands alive, it was the explorers who turned those whispers into journeys. The seas of the Renaissance and beyond were not only highways of trade and conquest, they were also stages where myth and ambition mingled. To sail into the unknown required courage, but also imagination, and few ideas fire the imagination as much as the possibility of discovering Atlantis. From Columbus to modern treasure hunters, explorers have carried Plato's vision across oceans, transforming a story told in a Greek dialogue into a centuries-long quest. When Christopher Columbus set out across the Atlantic in 1492, he did so in search of a new route to Asia, yet he was not untouched by legends. Some historians suggest he carried with him hints of Atlantis from old charts and stories passed down through mariners. Columbus wrote of islands rising from the ocean, of places that seemed like remnants of a forgotten world. Though he never claimed to have found Atlantis, his voyage reignited speculation that Plato's sunken continent might lie somewhere in the waters he crossed. In the wake of his discoveries, others began to wonder if the Americas themselves might be Atlantis reborn, a fragment of the ancient empire thrust above the waves once more. This speculation grew in the centuries that followed. Some thinkers, enchanted by the vastness of the New World, suggested that Native American civilizations were descended from Atlanteans. The advanced cities of the Maya and Aztec, with their temples and calendars, seemed to echo Plato's descriptions of sophisticated culture lost to time. Though such theories often ignored the unique achievements of indigenous peoples, they reveal how powerful the Atlantis myth had become. New land could hardly be seen without old myths being projected upon them. In the 17th and 18th centuries, as exploration pushed deeper into the globe, the hunt for Atlantis scattered across oceans. Some claimed it lay in the Caribbean, hidden among coral reefs and tropical islands. Others thought it was to be found in the Azores, a cluster of islands rising from the mid-Atlantic like mountain peaks of a drowned land. The Azores became a favorite candidate, their rugged beauty and isolation lending them a sense of mystery. Travelers described them as lonely remnants of a once greater whole, their cliffs and caves whispering of ancient cataclysms. By the 19th century, the Atlantis fever burned brighter still. The Industrial Age, with its thirst for discovery, turned old myths into quests that felt almost scientific. Ignatius Donnelly, an American congressman, published his famous book Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, in 1882, arguing that Atlantis had been the mother civilization of all known cultures. He claimed that the pyramids of Egypt, the architecture of the Americas, and even ancient myths across Europe and Asia were evidence of Atlantean influence. His book sold widely, sparking a wave of fascination that turned Atlantis into more than a philosopher's parable. It became a lost chapter of human history waiting to be recovered. Explorers, adventurers, and dreamers took Donnelly's words as inspiration, scanning seas and digging into ruins with Atlantis in mind. In the 20th century, expeditions grew more ambitious. Divers scoured the coast of the Mediterranean and the Caribbean, while scientists speculated about lost land bridges. When Edgar Cayce, the so-called sleeping prophet, declared in the 1930s that Atlantis would rise again near the Bahamas, explorers rushed to the region. Off Bimini, divers claimed to find massive stone formations, rows of blocks that looked like ancient roads or walls. Dubbed the Bimini Road, this site became one of the most famous alleged Atlantean remains, though geologists argue it is a natural formation of beach rock. Still, the allure was strong. For every skeptical explanation, there was a believer who saw the stones as proof that Plato's tale was true. As technology advanced, so too did the search. Sonar scanning, underwater archaeology, and satellite imaging opened new possibilities. Expeditions mapped the ocean floor, seeking geometric patterns or structures that might reveal human hands. The Caribbean, the Azores, and the Mediterranean all remained favorite candidates, each producing its own claims of discovery. Some explorers announced they had found roads, walls, or temples under the sea, images that captured headlines before fading into controversy. In the modern age, Atlantis has even drawn explorers from beyond archaeology. Engineers, scientists, and independent adventurers have each pursued the mystery in their own way. Some see Atlantis as a metaphor, and so their exploration is intellectual, searching for echoes in myths, in flood legends, in cultural connections across continents. Others, however, remain literal seekers, convinced that beneath the waves there is still a city waiting, its stones intact, its secrets untouched. Submersibles, drones, and high-resolution imaging continue the work that began with wooden ships and hand-drawn maps, carrying the hope that myth and history might at last converge. But what is most striking in this long line of seekers is not their discoveries. Few claims are held against scrutiny, but their persistence. For over 500 years, explorers have searched, not only because they believe Atlantis may be real, but because it represents something larger. To find Atlantis would be to uncover proof that the past holds mysteries greater than we imagine, that civilization itself is fragile, that memory can stretch back farther than written history. The quest for Atlantis is, in this sense, a mirror of exploration itself, a mixture of longing, ambition, and belief that there is always more to the world than we know. As we leave these explorers, sailors, prophets, divers, and scientists, we find ourselves standing on a threshold. Their journeys, whether successful or not, remind us that the line between history and myth is often navigated by those willing to risk the unknown. Yet for every voyage into uncharted waters, there have also been journeys inward, into the soul of culture and myth. When we set aside maps, manuscripts, and expeditions, Atlantis remains luminous and enduring as a story. Long after explorers returned empty-handed, long after divers debated whether stones beneath the sea were natural or man-made, Atlantis still thrives in the imagination. This resilience suggests that the power of Atlantis lies not only in whether it existed, but in what it represents. As myth, it is an archetype, a timeless tale that resonates across cultures because it speaks to something universal in the human spirit. At its heart, Atlantis is a story of a golden age undone. It tells of a society blessed with abundance, knowledge, and beauty, a world that stood at the height of power and potential. Yet within this glory lay a fatal flaw: pride. The Atlanteans, so the story goes, grew arrogant and greedy, turning their wealth and knowledge toward conquest rather than harmony. The gods, angered, sent catastrophe, and the city was swallowed by the sea. This is a story we know well, not only in Plato's writings, but in countless myths that mirror the same pattern: the rise of a great civilization, its corruption, and its fall. It is a Tower of Babel. It is a Garden of Eden. It is a flood of Noah. It is a fall of Rome. Atlantis is, in this way, not just a place but a lesson. Psychologists like Carl Jung would call such stories archetypes, primal patterns of thought that appear across cultures because they are woven into the collective unconscious of humanity. Atlantis, as an archetype, embodies both paradise and punishment. It is a dream of an ideal society, radiant and wise, and the warning of what happens when humanity strays from balance. It offers hope that such greatness is possible, and caution that such greatness can be lost. In this dual nature lies its power, for it reflects both our aspirations and our fears. As a symbol, Atlantis is versatile. To some, it represents lost wisdom, a civilization more advanced than we are, whose knowledge could transform the modern world if only we could recover it. In this sense, Atlantis is a beacon, a promise that humanity has reached such heights before and might again. To others, it is a warning against hubris, a reminder that pride and exploitation invite ruin. In this sense, Atlantis is a mirror reflecting the dangers of our own time, when technology and power grow rapidly and risk outpacing wisdom. The myth also speaks to the theme of memory and loss. A civilization once real, now forgotten, speaks directly to our own fear of impermanence. What will survive of us 1,000 years from now? What cities of ours will be ruins? What knowledge lost? What stories reduced to fragments? Atlantis offers a story-shaped answer, that even the greatest can vanish, that the ocean of time is vast, and that memory is fragile. To contemplate Atlantis is to contemplate our own vulnerability. And yet, the story also offers comfort. If Atlantis was once real, then perhaps its wisdom still lingers. Perhaps fragments survived, carried by survivors into new lands, seeding the growth of Egypt, Mesopotamia, or the Americas. This idea, that memory endures, that greatness is never wholly lost, offers hope in the face of decline. It reassures us that even if civilizations fall, humanity itself carries their spirit forward. The universality of the myth explains why Atlantis adapts so easily to new ages. In the Renaissance, it became a symbol of uncharted lands and discovery. In the 19th century, it reflected the hunger for grand narratives linking all civilizations together. In the 20th century, it was a canvas for both mystical visions and scientific speculation. In our own time, it becomes a parable about climate change and rising seas, a reminder that the earth itself can sweep away the structures we consider permanent. Each era sees itself in Atlantis, not because the story changes, but because we change and we draw from it what we need most. Another aspect of its symbolic power lies in its location, beneath the sea. Water, across myths, is a realm of the unknown, the subconscious, the hidden. To place Atlantis under waves is to situate it within mystery itself. It is a symbol of the depths of our own psyche, of wisdom submerged, of truths lying just beyond reach. The diver descending into ruins becomes an image of the seeker descending into memory, into the hidden chambers of the mind, searching for what has been forgotten. In this way, Atlantis is not only a myth about history, it is a myth about the self. Perhaps this is why Atlantis continues to call so strongly in the modern world. We are drawn not only to its promise of lost wisdom or its warning of downfall, but to the very act of seeking it. To look for Atlantis is to look for meaning. It is to believe that beneath the surface of the sea, of history, of the mind, there is more to be found. That search itself is the myth's gift to us. It keeps curiosity alive. It keeps wonder awake. It keeps us from believing that the known world is all there is. As myth, Atlantis is inexhaustible. It is a city and a symbol, a warning and a promise, a memory and a dream. Whether it existed or not matters less than the truths it continues to tell. Like all powerful myths, its value lies not only in what it describes, but in what it awakens within us. And so, as we leave the realm of symbolism, we find ourselves at the threshold of today. For while myth belongs to the timeless, Atlantis also speaks to the present. Its story is not just about the past or the imagination, but about the dangers and possibilities of our own age. The next step in our journey brings us to the modern world, where the myth of Atlantis echoes more urgently than ever as a mirror to our environmental challenges, our ambitions, and our precarious balance with the earth. Though Atlantis comes to us from ancient dialogue, its lessons speak with uncanny clarity to the modern world. In Plato's account, the downfall of Atlantis was not caused by an accident of nature alone, but by human choices. The Atlanteans, once noble and wise, turned their wealth and power into instruments of greed and domination. Their imbalance with the divine order, their hubris, brought about their destruction. In this way, Atlantis becomes more than a tale of a city drowned. It is a parable about what happens when humanity loses harmony with the forces that sustain life. When we look at our world today, the parallels are difficult to ignore. Rising sea threaten coastal cities across the globe. Storms grow stronger, glacier retreat, and entire communities face the prospect of displacement. The idea of a civilization undone by water no longer feels distant or mythical. It feels like a shadow of our own future. Atlantis, in this light, becomes not a memory of the past, but a warning for the present. The image of a glittering city swallowed by waves mirrors the vulnerability of our own proud centers of culture and power. Places like New York, Mumbai, and Jakarta stand on coastlines, exposed to the same forces that once erased Heraclean, Pavlopetri, and perhaps, if Plato's story holds truth, Atlantis itself. The myth reminds us that no society, however advanced, is immune to the laws of nature. Pride and neglect can hasten what water and earth already threaten. Beyond climate, Atlantis also speaks to excess. The Atlanteans are said to have lived in luxury, their halls adorned with gold, their stores filled with abundance. But over time, their abundance turned into corruption. The story suggests that prosperity without restraint leads not to security but to downfall. Our own world, with its growing consumption, its relentless hunger for resources, and its fragile balance with ecosystems, can read this lesson with sobering clarity. Atlantis becomes a mirror, showing us the cost of excess, the danger of imbalance, and the fragility of even the mightiest achievements. And yet, the lesson is not only a warning, it is also a call. If Atlantis fell because of imbalance, then perhaps we can preserve our own world by seeking balance. Myths endure not only because they frighten, but because they guide. To listen to the whisper of Atlantis is to remember humility before nature, to act with foresight, and to cherish the balance between human ambition and the earth that sustains it. In this way, the myth becomes deeply relevant to the environmental conversations of our time. It is not only scientists or policymakers who speak of rising seas, it is also storytellers, reminding us that the pattern of hubris and downfall is as old as humanity itself. To ignore the warning is to risk repeating it. To heed it is to honor the wisdom of myth and the resilience of memory. As we carry this reflection forward, we see that Atlantis is not just about what was lost, but about what can still be preserved. It reminds us that civilizations fall, but they also endure in memory, in lessons, in stories passed down to guide future generations. And so, from the warnings of the past, we now turn to the voices of today, the scholars, scientists, and dreamers who keep the dialogue alive, not only about whether Atlantis was real, but about why its story still matters. Across centuries and across cultures, the story of Atlantis has refused to fade. Though countless myths have risen and fallen, Atlantis remains fixed in the human imagination, glowing like a distant lighthouse across the sea of time. What is it about this tale, this vision of a lost civilization that continues to haunt us, to inspire exploration, to linger in our collective dreams? Perhaps it is because Atlantis rests on the border between possibility and impossibility, between memory and invention, between history and myth. It is just close enough to believe, yet just distant enough to remain a mystery. The allure begins with the promise of greatness. Atlantis is described as advanced, radiant, and majestic, a city of marvels that outshone all others. To dream of Atlantis is to dream of human potential realized in full, of harmony between people and nature, of technology and beauty working together. It appeals to our deepest yearning for a golden age, a time when life was more complete, more elevated, more profound. In this sense, Atlantis is a vision of what we might still become, but its allure is equally tied to its downfall. No matter how powerful, how wise, or how advanced, Atlantis was not immune to failure. Its destruction is a reminder of the fragility of civilization. We long to believe that progress will carry us forward indefinitely, yet Atlantis whispers that collapse is always near, that pride can undo the mightiest. This paradox, of glory and ruin bound together, gives the myth its emotional weight. Atlantis is not only a dream of perfection, but also a warning that perfection can shatter. The dream of Atlantis also stays because it is a mystery without resolution. Unlike the myths of Troy or Babylon, which were eventually confirmed through archaeology, Atlantis has never been unearthed. No ruins, no inscriptions, no conclusive proof have been found. And so, the myth remains suspended, unresolved. This suspension invites endless speculation. Could it lie beneath the waves of the Atlantic, buried under Antarctic ice, or hidden in plain sight within the Mediterranean? Every unanswered question fuels curiosity, and every failed search deepens a mystery. We are drawn not only to the possibility of discovery, but to the perpetual quest itself. Atlantis also appeals to the dreamer within us. For centuries, it has inspired works of art, literature, and philosophy. From Plato's dialogues to modern novels, from paintings of submerged temples to films of underwater kingdoms, Atlantis has become a canvas onto which each era paints its hopes and fears. In the Renaissance, it was imagined as a utopia of knowledge. In the Victorian era, it became a symbol of hidden science and ancient wisdom. Today, it resonates as both a cautionary tale about climate and a fantasy of exploration. It shifts with us, becoming whatever we most long to see. Another reason Atlantis endures is its universality. It is not only a Greek story, but a human one. Nearly every culture tells of a flood, a lost city, or a civilization destroyed by imbalance. From the Sumerian flood of Gilgamesh to the biblical deluge, from Hindu tales of Manu to the sinking of Lemuria in Tamil lore, humanity has long remembered, or imagined, a world before ours that ended in water. Atlantis is a gathering point for all these stories, a universal symbol of loss and renewal. By dreaming of Atlantis, we are in some sense dreaming of ourselves, our origins, our destiny, our place in the cycle of rise and fall. There is also the intimate, almost spiritual aspect of its allure. To believe in Atlantis is to believe in hidden truths, in mysteries waiting beneath the surface of the known. It is to acknowledge that the world is wider, deeper, and stranger than we can see. For some, Atlantis represents ancient wisdom, perhaps forgotten sciences, perhaps lost philosophies, that could still guide us if recovered. For others, it is simply a reminder that not all can be explained, and that the unknown still lives at the edges of the map. This comfort, the comfort of mystery, is itself a gift, especially in an age that seeks to explain everything. And perhaps the greatest reason Atlantis endures is that it touches both the rational and the imaginative. Scholars debate its origins. Explorers scan the ocean floor. Scientists examine tectonic shifts and melting ice caps. Yet at the same time, children draw kingdoms under the sea, Novelists build worlds of shining towers, and dreamers whisper of sunken cathedrals. Atlantis lives at the intersection of knowledge and imagination, satisfying the mind and feeding the soul. Few myths manage to live in both spaces, but Atlantis does effortlessly. As the journey through the myth and memory of Atlantis draws to its gentle close, we find ourselves standing at the edge of silence, listening to an echo that seems to come not only from the sea but from within ourselves. Atlantis is more than a story of a city lost beneath the waves. It is an eternal mirror, reflecting our brightest dreams and our deepest fears. It is a tale that balances hope with warning, grandeur with fragility, history with mystery. And in this balance lies its enduring power, the reason it continues to drift through human imagination like a distant song carried on the tides. The myth of Atlantis lingers because it embodies both presence and absence. Its presence is felt in the countless retellings, the paintings, the stories whispered at night, the expeditions that seek its ruins. Yet its absence, its lack of proof, its evasive silence, makes it even more compelling. We are drawn to what we cannot fully grasp. We hold on to Atlantis not because we know it was real, but because we are enchanted by the possibility that it might have been. In this way, Atlantis teaches us that sometimes the most powerful truths are not those carved in stone but those that live in the spaces between certainty and wonder. To close our eyes and think of Atlantis is to drift into a dreamscape where gleaming towers rise above the sea, where bridges span concentric circles of canals, where life was once filled with light and harmony. It is a vision not unlike the golden ages every culture remembers, times of balance, beauty, and wisdom that seem lost to us now. And yet, perhaps they are not lost at all, but remembered in fragments, carried forward through myth to remind us of what we could still achieve. The dream of Atlantis, then, is not only a remembrance but also an invitation, a reminder that greatness lies not in conquest but in harmony, not in excess but in balance. At the same time, the story carries with it a shadow, a warning whispered through centuries, that pride can undo even the mightiest, that nature cannot be ignored, that imbalance leads to collapse. Atlantis rose high but fell hard, and in its fall, we hear the tremors of our own vulnerabilities. The myth is not meant to frighten, but to humble, to remind us that we too stand on fragile shores, building towers close to rising tides. The echo of Atlantis is both beautiful and sobering, urging us to hold our civilization with care, to listen to the rhythms of the earth, and to remember that even the brightest lights can be dimmed. And yet, beyond history and beyond caution, there is also wonder. Atlantis endures not only as a moral parable but as a dream. It calls to explorers to search the sea floor, to scholars to trace ancient texts, to dreamers to imagine worlds beyond the map. It exists in every child who looks at the ocean and wonders what lies beneath, in every artist who paints an underwater kingdom, in every storyteller who whispers of lost cities in the quiet hours of night. In this sense, Atlantis is eternal because it lives where the human spirit longs most to wonder, in the space between the known and the unknown. When the waves close in, when the night grows deep, the story of Atlantis continues to ripple through time, not as a certainty but as a song of a world that might have been, of lessons that still matter, of dreams that still inspire. To listen to this song is to be reminded that history and mystery are not opposites but companions, that the stories we tell shape the way we see our world, and that some mysteries are most powerful when left unresolved. And so, as this whispered history reaches its end, we return to where we began, not with an answer, but with a question. Did Atlantis exist? Was it a city, a memory, a parable, or a dream? The truth may be forever hidden, but perhaps the truth is not the point. Atlantis endures not because we find it, but because we keep searching. It lives not in the ocean floor, but in the human heart, in our endless hunger to know, to imagine, to remember. The eternal echo of a sunken world lingers in that search, in the quiet rhythm of tides, in the stories told from one generation to the next. And if you listen closely, in the stillness of night, you may hear it too, a faint whisper rising from the depths, reminding you that even in loss there is beauty, and even in mystery there is meaning. Atlantis may be lost, but its voice remains, carried on the currents of time, calling us always to dream,